The flickering fluorescent lights above cast eerie shadows on the damp walls of the subway station. A chill swept through the air as 6 strangers stood in a disheveled huddle, glancing nervously at one another. None of them had anticipated being trapped here. The subway cars had swallowed them whole, a sudden lurch, a jarring stop, and now they were ensnared in a system that seemed to spiral indefinitely into the dark. "Where are we?" whispered Daphne, the youngest of the group, her voice trembling. Her wide eyes darted from one face to another, seeking reassurance. "Something's not right," Oliver said, his brow furrowed. "We've been riding for ages. Isn't there supposed to be a stop?" Their surroundings shifted. The platform trembled as if alive, graffiti-covered walls twisting in perverse patterns. The distant echo of metallic scraping began to fill the air, growing louder until it felt like a heartbeat throbbing in their bones. Suddenly, a subway car screeched to a halt, its doors wrenched open without a sound. The group hesitated for a moment, sharing apprehensive glances before deciding to board. Reluctantly, they stepped inside, the stale air pressing down on them. As the doors slid shut, an unsettling feeling crept over them. The interior was bare, save for the flickering lights above and the empty seats that faced the walls like restless spirits. Each bump and jolt sent fresh waves of panic rippling through them. They could see grimy tunnels stretching out in both directions, seemingly devoid of hope. Minutes blurred into an eternity. The only sound was the soft hum of the train as it glided through the inky darkness. Suddenly, an unholy wailing echoed from the depths of the tunnel, a sound that sent chills down their spines, reverberating with a promise of dread. What was that? Lexi gasped, her cheeks pale. "We need to get out of here," growled Tom, a burly man with a fierce determination. They exchanged glances, urgency clawing at their throats. One by one, they sprang forward, flinging themselves against the doors as panic took hold. But the train continued its relentless journey, unyielding. As they slumped back in defeat, the wailing morphed into deeper, guttural growls. The shadows around them twisted with life, whispering secrets that tickled the edges of sanity. They could feel hot breath ghosting the back of their necks, and when they turned, all that met their gaze was darkness. A sharp jolt threw them against each other, breaking the moment. The train began to slow, its screeching brakes carving through the tension. "Let's get out," Oliver urged, as the doors opened with an otherworldly creak. They tumbled out onto a dimly lit platform, but this one had an unsettling presence. Something about it felt wrong, foreign, almost alive. "Stay together," Tom commanded, clutching Daphne's shoulder tightly. They moved cautiously down the platform, the walls crawling with grotesque shapes. The tunnel yawned before them, the light behind fading into an almost tangible blackness. "Where do we go?" came Lexi's anguished tone. "Which way is home?" Drawing a deep breath, Tom gestured down the tunnel to the left. "Let's go that way. It has to lead somewhere." They ventured into the gloom, heartbeats loud in their ears. The deeper they traveled, the more the labyrinth twisted. The narrow corridors opened up into grotesque chambers filled with warped shadows. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently, causing scattered debris to rain from the ceiling. Panic erupted as they split, chaos unfolding around them. In that fray, they heard it, the maddening cacophony of claws scraping against stone, the imminence of something terrible approaching. "Daphne! Lexi!" they shouted, spurred by fear and determination. The echoes of their voices dissolved into the abysmal darkness, swallowed whole. As they regrouped, the true horror became apparent. The creatures emerged from the walls themselves, twisted aberrations covered in muck, eyes gleaming with an otherworldly hunger. Their limbs elongated, twisting, stretching unnaturally like shadows come to life. "Run!" Tom screamed, but the subway began to pulsate, a living entity entangling them within its grasp. The walls seemed to close in. It was no longer a simple escape, they were now part of the chaotic design, a sacrifice to the darkness that thrived on their terror. Daphne, panic-stricken, stumbled as hands reached out from the very ground beneath her. She looked back to see the grotesque faces pulling closer, their jagged teeth almost illuminating the shadows in a ghastly grin. "Help!" she screamed, her voice slicing through the cacophony of chaos. Tom hurled himself toward her, but the fluctuations in the ground were tearing them apart, sending waves of shadows that twisted and turned like serpents. In an act of desperation, Oliver ran toward the nearest wall, slamming his fists against the grimy surface. "There has to be a way out," he yelled. The wall shimmered momentarily, revealing glimpses of the world beyond, a fractured reality filled with raucous laughter and haunting cries, fading in and out of focus. "Don't touch it," Lexi shouted, but it was too late. Oliver's hand connected with the wall, and in an instant, it absorbed him, pulling him into the very fabric of the darkness. His last cry echoed through the tunnel, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. "No. No." Tom grasped Daphne's arm, drawing her closer as Lexi stumbled backward in horror. The creatures surged forward, disregarding the walls, hungry for the warmth of their fear. The air itself seemed to distort under the weight of their malevolence. "Keep moving," Tom urged, and they fled deeper into the tunnel, where the light faded from view and madness loomed at every turn. Shadows danced along the tunnel walls, whispering secrets that rattled their minds. In their frantic sprint, they felt the pulse of the labyrinth quicken, synchronizing with the beating of their hearts. They arrived at a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center, an ancient stone altar jutted from the floor, covered in grotesque runes that writhed like living creatures. The sound of dragging feet drew closer, each thud promising the end. "Over there." Daphne pointed toward a narrow passage obscured by shadow. The instinct to flee overwhelmed their senses, and they dashed toward the opening, hearts racing. But just as they reached it, the creatures erupted from the walls, their forms grotesque and shifting. Without warning, they lunged toward them, claws outstretched. Tom shoved Daphne through the passage, shouting, "Keep going," as he was pulled back into the grasp of the crawling horrors. "Tom!" Daphne cried out, tears streaming down her face, but there was no time to mourn. She took a deep breath, urged on by Lexi, who grabbed her hand and pulled her through the narrow opening. They emerged into what could only be described as a hall of mirrors. Reflections twisted and wavered, showing not just their appearances but visions of their worst fears, twisted relatives, dark places, and haunting memories. It was an onslaught of despair. "We have to keep moving," Lexi urged, eyes wide with terror. They pressed on, racing through the disorienting maze, hoping for an exit as the sounds of chaos faded behind them. They could hear the creatures screeching, angry that their prey had escaped. At the end of the hall, a doorway beckoned, dim light spilling from the cracks. They reached for it, frantically bursting through the threshold into what they thought would be freedom.